This is so good. Because just when you think that American politics has hit the ceiling of absurdity, kind of like a raccoon learning how to work a flamethrower, we get a sitting president feuding with the Pope. Yeah, that Pope. Not the local bishop, not a guy who runs a church potluck and he criticizes your potato salad. The Pope, the CEO of Catholicism, the spiritual leader of over 1 billion people, the one guy on earth that can wear a 40-pound hat and still look underdressed for the job. And this one, Pope Leo XIV, the first American Pope, which is his own way kind of wild, because somewhere in Chicago there's some guy going, hey, wait, the Pope is from here? Does he owe me $20? Because you know what? He just might. Because in my head, I see him as kind of a regular guy. There he is, Pope Leo, wearing a windbreaker over his White Sox jersey because, it's October in Chicago. Muttering something like, those umpires are a sin from God. Those umpires, muttering something like, those umpires are a sin against God. That was in 2005. Here he is as a young priest while he was doing that was in 2005. And here he is as a young priest hanging out with the kids when he did his missionary work in Peru. Now, here's Donald Trump hanging out with the kids in the 90s. And then, cut back to reality, because this isn't just a weird cultural mashup. This is a real escalating conflict which finally spilled over. The president posts a direct attack on the Pope. Weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy. Again, the Pope. Weak on crime. What does that even mean? And is the Vatican supposed to have their own SWAT team now? Freeze! Drop the rosary! And then, because of course Trump adds, I don't want a pope who thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Because that is not what the Pope said. What the Pope said in a Palm Sunday homily was, that is not a policy white paper. That is God hanging up on you, Donald. And after Trump posted that a whole civilization will die if they don't comply, the Pope responded in the most polite Catholic way possible of saying, what are you doing? He called the threat unacceptable, which again in Pope language translates to, sir, this is a moral disaster. And here's the important part. This is not politics. This is the Pope restating a long-standing position in church teaching, that defending people is one thing, but seeking to dominate or subjugate entire nations, it's morally different. It does not make war or any other action like that permissible. It does not make war or any other action like that permissible. Just because you started a fire, Donald, doesn't mean you can burn down the entire neighborhood. Because after all that, he posts an AI image of himself as Jesus. Yeah, Jesus. Now, imagine that, but with a red tie and a subpoena somewhere in the background, glowing hands, healing a man in a hospital bed. And then he takes it down and says, no. That's not Jesus. That's me as a doctor. Sir, you once looked directly into a camera and told us to inject bleach in our butts to cure COVID. You are not a doctor. You are what happens when a YouTube comments section achieves human form. And the Pope, to his credit, does not respond with memes. He responds like a pope, A man who literally knows that his boss is God. You cannot imitate someone who reports to the And the Pope, to his credit, does not respond with memes. He responds like a pope, a man who knows his boss is literally God. And the Pope, to his credit, does not respond with memes. He responds like a pope, a man who knows his boss is literally God. You cannot intimidate someone who reports to the final authority. And now, enter J.D. Vance. Oh, J.D., the man who converted to Catholicism in 2019, which means he is basically a freshman in theology. Suddenly he's being asked to mediate between the Pope and Trump. And Donald Trump, and now, enter J.D. Vance. Oh, J.D., the man who converted to Catholicism in 2019, which basically means he's a freshman. And now, enter J.D. Vance, the man who And now, enter J.D. Vance, the man who converted to Catholicism in 2019, which basically means that he's a freshman in theology. He's suddenly being asked to mediate between the Pope and Donald Trump. This is like asking the guy who just got his driver's permit to mediate a 16-car pileup. And Vance, instead of picking a side, says, "Oh, really? The Pope should be careful about theology." That, JD, is like telling a surgeon, "Hey, you be careful with that scalpel," or telling a shark, "Hey, you're being a little aggressive in the water, aren't you?" And now, here's where it gets interesting. The reason this bothers Trump so much might be that he believed. Let's back it up. And now, and here's where it gets interesting. The reason this bothers Trump so much is because might be that he believed he had won not just a political argument, but a moral one. That ruthlessness, Dolly Grindom, not just a Beckett, but right. Okay. And now, and here's where it gets interesting. The reason this bothers Trump so much is because, well, he might have believed that he had just won a political argument. I'm going to back it up because of the light. Got weird. And now, and here's where it gets interesting. The reason this bothers Trump so much is because here's where it gets interesting, is because this bothers Trump so much because he believed he had won not just a political argument, but a moral one. That ruthlessness, dominance, crackdowns were not just effective. We're not just effective, but right. And then enters a pope from America with equal stature saying, no, charity, restraint, peace. And suddenly there is a competition for the more, and suddenly there is a competition for the moral argument. And suddenly there is a competition for the moral narrative. And that drives Trump crazy, because you can argue policy, but when someone walks in with 2,000 years of moral authority and says, this is wrong, that's a different fight. And honestly, at this point, why stop there? Let's just fully commit. Let's create America's own Pope. Yes, I give you Pope J.D. Vance the First, the anti-pope. Cut to a ceremony somewhere in the megachurch. Back it up. And honestly, at this point, why stop there? Let's fully commit. Let's create America's own Pope. Yes, I give you J.D. Vance, or as someone has suggested, the anti-pope. Cut to a ceremony somewhere in a mega church / Apple store hybrid. Vance walks in wearing a mitre made of red baseball hats, and they place a copy of Hillbilly Elegy in his palms. A choir sings, but no, it's just podcast intro music. And then Trump appears, floating, glowing, still insisting that he is a doctor. And Vance declares, I will interpret the teachings of Christ. And Vance declares, from this day forward, I will And Vance declares, from this day forward, I will interpret the teachings of Christ as long as they poll well. Because that is where we are. A real pope talking about morality. Because that is where we are. A real pope talking about morality, war, the sanctity of life, and a president posting AI Jesus selfies about himself. And then, take two on that. And then Vance declares, from this day forward, I will interpret the teachings of Christ as long as they poll well. And the crowd goes wild because, yes, that is where we are. A real pope talking about morality, war, because that is where we are. A real pope talking about morality, war, the sanctity of life, and a president posting himself as Jesus in AI videos, and a president posting himself as an AI Jesus, and a president posting himself in AI Jesus. Wait. And a president posting AI Jesus selfies of himself, arguing that he's basically Doogie Howser. But maybe somewhere in Chicago, Pope Leo is watching a White Sox game, muttering, Father, forgive them. They don't even understand the rules of baseball, let alone war. And honestly, he might be the only adult left in this room.